What I'll do is I'll write off the statistics I gave, and the writing and read it.
I did one like that. I did not like that. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So I skipped it. And then I was like, well, I don't like it. Go back and just finish up.
Oh, what? Got a lot more knocked out on you? Big priorities, man.
Like I said, Sunday I'll be this morning. I don't do something. I go on my own day. I'll talk to my church. Especially on Monday, I have to.
It's Charles.
No, Curtis. There's got to be something more to it, right?
I read all of them. I read all of them. Chapters. I read
All I can do is I did that.
and
Oh, no.
You didn't get any feedback or anything, right?
Whatever.
Well, that was, no, I know, right?
Whatever it is. I don't know if I have
It's been an IE.
I don't know, man. I ask him
How
what
do
he
you be able to find it in the book unless we know what to look for?
Gives you a percentile.
I suppose he said follow the directions.
Other grades easier. Oh, I can't understand.
I did root right now.
Right. Well, considering how we
I break them down each like.
Yes, right.
You're done.
On to the next. So,
Briefly about,
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, to talk about probably not
together for just a couple of minutes.
Dennis.mcgow at
Finding correctly.
sorry. I won't worry about it.
We have to watch 5 of them. One he's posted no comment. And the other
it took me a good like 20 minutes before I was like, and I finally was like,
yeah.
Usually starting, but it's like
and then it's more really you.
I cut out one whole section. I'm like, oh, I can count on that.
I turned and I was like, okay. But I answered every round.
guess that's stay away.
And then you kind of, and there's like usually.
The second one was okay. The first one, I just blew that.
But not giving us like
I
big
do.
duty. Right? Oh, yeah, somebody put all this in like you're.
And then they, from that.
Nothing guarantees with the market.
At all.
37,000.
But you can measure where you can.
Yeah.
Definitely you can.
Reality is setting in.
What they like to see is with, they like to see the top. They're like, oh, man.
No, I think I want to do my HR. Right now.
Looking at this and that.
Got nothing else to say.
That it's you.
Number may be.
We made assignments out Wednesday. I started my research because it's tomorrow, right?
Definitely got for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Other two, yeah.
Yeah, I was going through that. It's like a your portion. One of these, Jim. It's one of these. It's one of these. Like my, we pushed the code, we did. Yes or no? We sold the product, here it is. Yes or no? You don't know what it looks like.
I went home, I went and got dressed and everything. I was ready. I just knew I was ready.
You don't have all the credentials.
Did you get the handout that was?
Oh, that's right. I'm just trying to. You want a copy of the check?
That I have the
Looks like it. Looks like the itinerary. Good guess, holiday.
Yeah, now I have it.
I know, right?
Take it home, bro.
I know, right?
Oh, you stupid.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I still got my album.
But it's 6 pages. It first popped up, it said, "Oh, outside."
All right. Let's go ahead and head back into your seats, and we'll close off with sort of the last pieces on here. Obviously, there's a lot of material in that chapter, so we're not going to go into bloody detail on all those kind of things. We're just going to point a little bit towards some of the stuff. But the global employee relations aspect is an interesting one. You talk about the nature and quality relationship between the organization and their employees. Well, you know, that's what we're concerned about in the U.S. as well. It's just that when you go global, it gets even a little more complicated. And in fact, maybe you might have some people that would say, well, why the heck do we need to be concerned about that? Right? We should be concerned about that clearly in our home country, but why go through much extremes, in the areas that we're out there in? So you can see, especially when you start talking about some of the nature in which employees' personal interests and needs are protected and served by the multinational. Okay? What do you guys think about that line? Protected and served. Sounds like Batman. Okay. And you may have third-party activists that swoop in like Batman, right? Okay. You buy into that? It depends on whether that's a business strategy. Okay. Well, what happens if we don't serve employee interests and needs are protected?
They'll be dissatisfied.
They'll be dissatisfied, they may leave, we get turnover, and now you pull in the stuff that you remember right from OB and things like that, right? Because there are consequences when we sort of screw things up a little bit, okay? So when we look at the MNC employee relations issues, one of the things that we want to recognize at first, of course, is that the conditions that are out there. In a lot of the different countries, they're desperate to go ahead and have those multinational jobs in there, even though those are low-paying jobs. But when you have that bunch of people competing for that work, right, and you've got a lot of people that are out there that are looking for work, that sets the stage that you can take short-term points of view, maximize your own profit at the expense of whatever your workforce is. And have we seen that? Yeah, absolutely, right? As you research through the different things for your projects and things like that, you may have encountered that kind of things about the differences when you roll a whole bunch of people over, like third country nationals and things like that over. Okay. So the result is that you got this vulnerability to workplace abuse because you really can't, you want your job, you're not going to protest, right? You're going to go along. They want you to work overtime. Okay, wake me up out of bed so I can go and work another 10 hours, okay? That's the kind of stuff that when push comes to shove, the people that are working in those kind of positions, that's the kind of circumstances in the life that they're leading, okay? Now, you'd argue that, okay, whose responsibility is it? The first line of defense for companies would be, I hired out to the contractors, right? And I vetted the contractors. But the problem is the contractors hire out subcontractors, right? And this is a problem like for organizations in terms of, let me use a different analogy. Like we did some work for a defense contractor, and their problem is that they want to try to get a handle on risk, but where they can see the risk is in their first level suppliers, right? That's no problem. We can see sort of problems that may be showing up there in their supply line and things like that. What they can't see is the suppliers to their first-tier suppliers, right? That they have no visibility into. So you have no idea under difficult economic conditions whether those sub-suppliers are going to go broke, affecting sort of the delivery schedule of their tier 1 suppliers, which will affect their production of their product, right? In this case, we might take a similar approach and saying, hey, are you peering in deep enough? Not just to look at your first contractor, but looking at the subcontractors that they're hiring or how they're treating people. Or is it that we're just looking at the brochure or we're just looking at the YouTube video that they post up about what a wonderful place this is to work at? Multiple swimming pools, that kind of things. Okay? And what it goes to is the idea that you've got to do due diligence. As you guys, again, have been running your projects and you dig a little deeper into that kind of stuff, you understand what due diligence means in terms of looking at that and the impact on the workforce or where are we going to get the talent from. So some of the things they talked about in the chapter, of course, is all of the things that can result from that vulnerability, right? So forced labor, harmful child labor, workplace discrimination, health and safety hazards, job security and displacement. And when you put people under pressure to make money, for example, are the factories in China under pressure? And where are they under pressure from? From us, okay, to go ahead and reduce prices. Where else are they under pressure from? Yeah?
From the high
Well,
as we get into these.
so popular electronic products, right, have this sort of incredible kind of high-end kind of bunch of, well, not high-end, but a whole bunch of people want it at once, right? So how do you ramp up in those kind of things? Well, competitors. What kind of competitors? Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, right? A whole bunch of places where what China used to be using, they've sort of passed on, right? They don't make shoes anymore, for example, which is a good thing because that is a really nasty kind of, environmentally nasty kind of job to go ahead and make shoes, all that tanning and things like that. That's moved on to like Vietnam, okay? But if you're a factory worker, you're looking at all these kind of jobs beginning to move on. You're looking at sort of going ahead and trying to get higher wages and prices and things like that. And when you do that, you see that your jobs begin to move to the interior of China, right? So rather than be on the coastal cities or things like that, you may now have to move somewhere, God knows where, inside China or move somewhere else. Yes, Victoria?
Coming along with that too, the pressure comes from the additional standards that we all place, we as consumers place on quality, right? So we have lower tolerance for when the iPhone goes, has a bug or something like that. So we're approaching those, those pressures translate into not only do you have to be fast and output more, but you also have to, exercise care and have high quality too.
Yeah.
Where do you get it?
And if you've got people who have not been exposed to sort of Western management thought, how do you go ahead and get those people to deliver high-quality products? Yeah.
Mostly process dependent. So you make the process foolproof and take the ownership of creating the quality product out of that individual's hand and instill the quality in the process.
Now, we can design the process, right?
As soon as you make the process foolproof, a better fool comes along.
Or a worse fool comes along, right? A better fool going the other way. Yeah, that's the problem, though, right? Is that this is like, from an engineering point of view, it would be great if you can specify those things and all those people that are doing the assembly are exactly alike and perform exactly alike. But we know that's not the case, right? Things get mucked up when you throw people into the equation, okay? Because they have simpering needs and all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah.
Good robots, but anyway, I guess it's training. You're going to have to, along with the process, you're going to have to train and do that culturally in a way that they can accept it.
So when are we going to have time for training when, as Victoria's saying, that there's this high demand for product that's pushing everybody around, right?
Are you going to have time for it, or are you going to have to do it at the same time? You may have to hire another shift and have one shift in training and one shift doing the stuff. And then as you mix and match them, they get better over time.
You remember that opening incident that opens up this chapter on employee relations? The guy that committed suicide jumping off the top of the building and things like that? How many hours of overtime did he rack up in that last month? Yeah, about 116 or things like that. Can you conceive of 116 overtime hours in a month? Okay. That's hard to imagine, right? So those what?
Back when I was billing hours as a lawyer.
Oh, yeah. These guys, however, it's a little different when you're going there. So what I'm going to do is we're going to revisit Foxconn, okay? Just because it's kind of fun to visit them, and the CEO, made some great little statements, okay? So we're going to go back through this. So I'll show you a bit of a different video, but it'll give you a bit of an idea of the workers there, what kind of living conditions are they under, okay? And sort of, if you get this idea that you're living in a dormitory, do you remember when you lived in a dormitory? Was it fun? Oh, yeah, great time, right? You can party on down the hall. They're running this party. Down the other hall, they're doing another type of party. It was fun, except for me because I lived in an all-guys dorm. Okay, that was a bad mistake that I let my roommate pick one of these things. Okay, that was okay. Here we go.
Does the world's biggest supplier of electronic and computer parts open up to the outside world? Foxconn, best known as the maker of Apple's iPhone and iPad, is obsessive about secrecy and security. This complex is spread over less than a square mile, and 300,000 mostly young workers from the countryside live, sleep, and work here.
This could be their first job away from home, right?
Most of them his first job.
And a growing number of these workers are either killing themselves or trying to, and Foxconn doesn't know why. We've never seen anything like this before, says Liu Kun, the company spokesman. Workers spend long hours on the assembly line, not only supplying parts for Apple, but also for tech giants Dell, Hewlett-Packard and Nokia, earning less than $300 a month. Under the watchful eye of Mr. Liu, we talked to this young woman.
So a model happy employee. You're happy?
But critics say that's not the whole story.
They wake up, they have breakfast, they go to work, they work a solid shift, they come back to their dormitory, they sleep. It's a very dehumanizing place, and the workers are little more than the machines there.
Employees live in dormitories 8 to a room, common for factories in China. Often roommates, though, will not know each other's names.
Do you know these guys? Do you know their names? Do you know where they're from and all that kind of stuff?
She arrived 3 days ago. I don't know her name, she says.
There's no real sense of community there, and I think that is one of the significant factors behind this alarming number of suicides.
And Foxconn admits managers have been known to abuse workers if they make mistakes or miss deadlines. What we can and must change is the rude attitude some managers have towards our workers, he says. And while this complex is like a city within a city, with 3 hospitals, fire stations, restaurants and supermarkets, recreational facilities are few. 5 pools, libraries and 400 computers. That's one for every 750 workers. The company has set up a hotline.
How many suicides have you prevented in recent weeks here?
Over the 1 month.
1 month, yeah.
Actually, maybe over 30 of
No, this now. If you could put it.
Councils
Got a good
have
example.
called in. And in this stress room, employees can work out their frustration. Even so, Mr. Liu says another suicide is inevitable. When? Not if. I don't think our prevention is enough to stop the suicide trend.
So what could be happening here, according to some experts, has all the hallmarks of what's known as a suicide cluster, when the idea of suicide quickly spreads amongst a group of people, often teenagers or young adults.
Still, none of that is putting off the hundreds who line up every day hoping for a job.
Have you heard about people who have been dying at Foxconn, some people who committed suicide?
Some people might find it stressful and difficult work, he says, but it's not a problem for me, because for many young workers moving to the city, a job at Foxconn is still a much better option than staying at home on a farm. John Ward, CNN, Shenzhen, China.
Staying at home on the farm in China. What do you think rural life is like? Poverty, poor, very subsistence. Could be blissful as long as you can find food. Yeah. Okay.
We did like a mainland China stay, so we did a like village stay, and yeah, no power, no electricity, but the kids would work out. Like it's all about calisthenics in the morning. But you're right, there's nothing out there.
Right. So when you look towards future in terms of trying to advance yourself, the only way you're going to advance yourself is going into the city, right? And you all know about China's plans, right, to go ahead and move whole bunches of people from the rural areas into the cities, and the fact that they've already built cities, right, that are sitting there empty just waiting for them. You just got to be able to have the businesses there for the jobs to be there, right? But Chairman Guo, okay, Chairman of Foxconn, here's some of his comments. You know, maybe he's inspirational for his people. What do you think? I mean, that's the kind of stuff that can sort of move people, right? So here's one of his comments. Are you inspired?
Yep.
Yeah. Those are plastered on the wall in the factory, okay? Just like you would have things like what's plastered on your walls. You know, teamwork, inspirational kind of things, right? Okay, well, here's his version of inspirational stuff. You don't like this one? How about this one? You guys are just too wimpy as managers, you know? You just got to suck it up and do better. You know, he complains about the fact that if he was in Taiwan, he wouldn't be held up to this kind of scrutiny. Okay? It's only because he's in mainland China that he's getting held up to this kind of scrutiny. Okay? So here are some facts and figures, and what you should be asking yourself is, okay, so what impact does this have on the workforce? So you are now the Chinese factory worker, and here's what you start hearing. You make a little less, or you make less than $300 per month. Okay? Now, keep in mind, what does every good Chinese son or daughter have to do twice a year? Go home. Okay? And they all go home at the same period of time, which is why you see like those gigantic crowds and stuff like that. And when there was a big storm, things that shut down the rail system so people couldn't get home, that was a huge problem, okay, for things like that. But you're going to spend a good chunk of your money to get home, buy gifts to take back home. So how much money do you have left for your life? Very close to nothing, right? So maybe you're there because you think you're going to learn more, or grow, or do some other things. But your wages were increased by 9%, but the quota rose by 25%. So what does that mean you're doing?
18 hour shifts.
You're working longer, right? So even if you made more money, there's not much you can do about that. And if you started off with dreams that you were going to start your own business because you're going to go there, make some money, and get things rolling, well, congratulations, you join all the others which crashed and burned on those kind of things. And instead, what you got is exhaustion, okay, from the number of hours working. Now, admittedly, Foxconn is sort of like one of those kind of examples we can hold up there. There are others that are just as bad. We'll do that in a moment. They talked about sort of setting up that company, hotline, okay? Except when you go ahead and check within the context of the people that are in the factories, they don't trust the hotline, because what do they think? They're going to know who it is, and if you complain, get fired. Well, wait, I thought they needed workers. They're all outside the gate, just sitting there waiting to be ported in. So there's no good reason, if you're management there, to go ahead and say, hey, the jobs don't require longevity. I just need them to work their butts off, because what we've done is we've simplified the work so that they are like a machine, but they're only doing something very simple. That's their version of a factory. Okay? So if I lose my job, where do I end up going? I go back to the farm, if I can go ahead and do that, or I've got to try to find another job in the city in China. Okay? How many people do you think are looking for jobs in that city? Large numbers.
Do you have realistic unemployment numbers in cities?
Which?
Like in Beijing, Shanghai? Do we have realistic, not from the government, but realistic?
That part I don't know in terms of that, but that's a good question to ask, when you're out there in terms of what are the realistic numbers. There may be some, you may have some expats or others that are out there that may be able to tell you some of those kind of things. So maybe if we made their work life a little better, right, that would help. So some of the academics that were in China said, you know what, you got to stop this military discipline that you've got going on in the factories. Okay? Foxconn's response, we saw part of that the last go-around, we'll replace workers with robots. Okay? The other part of the response is, we need to increase productivity. How does that help out? I guess if you increase productivity, that means we're working them harder, right? So that they must be more virtuous because they're working harder, things like that. Okay? Or they just simply are too exhausted to be able to do things. Now, you saw those women that were in the 8 to a room kind of stuff? Wouldn't that be a way that you could get to know a variety of other people? What? They're asleep? Yeah, the woman had a thing. And they come from different parts of China. The dialects are different. They could learn to go ahead and interact and actually get some of the stuff that you and I got when we went to sort of college. But for them, it's going to take a longer time. But they don't have time, right? If the demand for iPhones goes up, they need to work more overtime. That's why you got that 116 hours, right, for that guy that committed suicide, was because that's what will happen. They'll wake you up to go ahead and have you work that so that they can meet the deadlines. Okay? Now, that was Foxconn, and that was the ones producing the iPads and things like that, or the iPhones. But in January of 2012, you had 150 employees standing on the roof of the factory, basically saying they were going to do mass suicide. Okay? And why are they doing this? Because they feel like it's about the only leverage they have left to be able to affect things. Right? Somehow it would be difficult for Foxconn, I think, to explain 150 people jumping off the building at once. What do you think? 14 over a period of time, you can say, well, our suicide rate is less than the country as a whole. Right? 150 at once? That, I think, would be difficult for anybody to explain. Right? But you note that it's not just one particular plant in Shenzhen, okay, or one particular plant elsewhere. This is a completely different plant in another different area making a different type of product. Okay? What's consistent is the way that the workers are treated, the management style that they're being exposed to. Okay? So if you're asking how do we go ahead and fix some of these kind of things, that's the thing you're going to have to look at. Right? And this is the part when we talk about sort of the global human resource management. Right? What do we do with respect to employee relations? Okay? Now, it's also the case that, hey, we don't have to just pick on China, right? What else can we go ahead and talk about? Mike? Everywhere, okay. Did we see any big things that happened in the news recently? India, Bangladesh, right? You remember that factory that collapsed, okay, substandard materials and things like that? They knew about it. They still kept them in there, doors locked and stuff like that, and boom, a bunch of people die. Yeah.
I wonder even how effective, if there were the mass suicide, it might be effective for a period of time, but we tend to be so transient in our recollection that, things kind of creep up. We have to kind of force them, like with Nike, right? Force them to become more sensitive, make their business pay, they being the multinational subcontracting or contracting.
Yeah. Well, and, political action or building awareness can be useful, right? You can embarrass people. Or you can embarrass companies by saying, this is what they're doing, this is how they're kind of running their business. But the other thing that was interesting as you read through that chapter was they had an interesting comment about Nike's action. You remember it? What did Nike decide to do to make sure that there was no child labor in their facilities? You can do audits. Yep, that's to check after the fact. Before the fact, what do? I mean, when you're hiring people.
You require an age.
You require an age. How old?
13.
Nope. Nope. In Nike's case, it was 18, right? Because then they don't have to deal with saying that you have children working for you. But 18 is a Western standard, right, in terms of that kind of stuff. Problem is that when you do that, there's places in Pakistan where they were making the hand-stitched soccer balls and things like that. When they up and left, you left behind a whole bunch of people that no longer were able to support themselves, right? So this is where ethics, especially as we think about things in terms of global versus U.S. and things like that, where the answers aren't always just the simple, hey, child labor, hire people above 18, okay? What would be a better way to go ahead and set the age, minimum age? Good.
I think it needs to be somewhat customized to the local laws. In other words, in some countries, just as you were saying, people just don't have anything. And so kids as young as 10, 12 years old may work, and men, I want them to work, but they don't have anything to eat if they didn't work. And so maybe lower the age limit from 18 to something more reasonable, maybe 12, maybe 14, I don't know.
Well, that's the problem, right? It's hard to tell which is which. Sean.
Stakeholder approach with the community and the government.
Okay. What do you mean?
Stakeholder approach. Basically, you're getting their input on what is appropriate, and it's an open forum. The press could view it. It could be an open discussion. And that way, there's visibility, transparency, and you come to a reasonable answer.
Well, maybe we can do this a little more logically at first, right, in terms of individually,
I
I was going to say, isn't there like some kind of world organization that, I don't know,
Yes.
something that regulates, and they have some standards that they say,
Right.
on average.
But the standards, again, can't be one size fits all, right? 18 is one size fits all. 12 would be one size fits all, right? What we're looking for is an appropriate criteria that can go ahead and be used. Yeah.
I was going to say, that I think that's where the NGOs, those, that have local presence and advocacy for employee rights, and maybe that's where you can have them as a stakeholder so that they can help inform what are the right practices for that to have.
Okay. Yeah, and that's good to go ahead and pull in other people or groups and things like that to exert pressure. Right. But let's flip this around and say, what do we want the children to be doing instead of working? You want them doing schooling, right? Because how are they going to advance? How are they going to be able to do more advanced jobs if they don't get any education? Otherwise, they're going to be stuck in the same loop that their parents may have been before them, and you never break out of that loop. Yeah?
Yes, it's a very interesting trend because if you pull out, like you said in Pakistan, they pull out the handstick box, and those kids are probably going to now stand by the street and
Beg.
And
Yeah.
that's the sad part of people doing business away. So yes, you're right. You have to come up with a cultural plan where the kids who go to school and get paid for it and probably even do some kind of work, even if it's not hard labor, but give them an opportunity to train on their skills as they go along. You cannot change a society's needs because you feel it is incorrect. They might have parts of the family that cannot provide for them.
Right.
You have to think of that in those terms. The most important thing is to have legislation from local countries. Actually, you can't go in and try to exert yourself, but get the governments come and do something, and you have to probably push lobby those governments to do something.
Okay. That makes sense, to go ahead and try to do something.
I was just going to say, I think that it's one of those things, as the economy develops, in order for it to sustain, education becomes even more important, right? Because those jobs end up going away, and then what do those people have to fall back on?
Right. Although, when you remember although I hate Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think it sometimes is really useful, right?
It's common sense, though.
Well, it is. It's just hard to go ahead and say antecedent-wise which stage you're in. Except when you're dealing with abjectly poor people. We know that the concern's got to be survival, right? You're not thinking long-term and you're not thinking about something else. On the other hand, if we're a Western country or a developed country, can you think about doing things that are not just perfectly attuned to the bottom line and saying that the way we're going to enter in here, we're going to translate doing things for the community is saying that we will actually, in this village that we've got our factory located in, educate the kids, give them money, give them books and things like that, and we're going to support that, okay? And they can only join us after a certain age. Now, the question is what age? The age is when their formal schooling is no longer required, okay? So in the U.S., how long are we supposed to go to school till? 18, right? Although people can drop out and do other things. That's true. Okay, so whenever you met the requirements of going ahead and doing high school, okay, I might have taken a few extra years. No. Oh, that was undergrad. Yeah, that was a little different. No, that was graduate school. I forgot, yeah.
Well, one of the reasons we shift a lot of work to some of these countries is for the efficiencies and cost efficiencies we can achieve in labor.
Right.
Right? Now you start getting more education. With education, comes enlightenment. Enlightenment, now people want more education, and labor cost goes up.
Yep.
They're seeing some of that in China already.
Right.
So now,
and India.
Yeah. So now
starting to price themselves out.
In terms of educational level, people are going to demand more from the market, and now you lose those efficiencies. So, we get to a certain point where it costs you just as much to do your work in China as it does to do
Well, this is the crux of the argument, isn't it? I mean, from a financial point of view, we're going there because we want to get our products produced for the least cost possible. To do that, though, we're setting up the conditions for those for the abuse, right? Because we are forcing it down, 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 down as much as possible, right? It's like having, getting a contract from Walmart, and you say, "Wow, fantastic! They're going to take like almost all of your production." Except every year, what do they tell you? Reduce the price, reduce the price, reduce the price, and then pretty soon you can't manufacture that freaking product and make a profit, right? So that's a problem. Yeah, Jim. Yeah.
They were going to do certain things to make it better for all their workers and all that stuff. And then there's Tom's. There's all these companies that have this sort of vision to be, and they get people to buy their stuff partly because of that. So you could fold that into a marketing strategy, and actually, maybe you don't lose that.
Yeah. However, how long are we going to go appealing to just yuppies, and things like that are willing, soft-hearted yuppies at that, right? Okay. Come on. I mean, that's just a fake, I'll just give you that kind of thing. No, but it's, the interesting thing is that, we do have those kind of companies that we can point to, but what's going to happen is people are going to say, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to go ahead and maximize shareholder value. Shareholder value does not like this idea of giving more money to people than you need to give them. Doesn't that violate the stuff you guys read about in finance? And if it doesn't, how do you translate goodwill or things like that into your spreadsheet so that it is reflected as part of your decision making? Yeah?
But it seems that there's a small cost that would have a huge impact on the treatment of workers. If you're talking about one employee, $300 a month, I mean, it seems like there's a calculus where you can hire maybe so many people to guarantee a certain shift. And the cost of that isn't going to be so huge that it's going to really impact your business. It just seems like that calculus needs to happen. You get the best bang for your buck. It's still not going to be great work, but you can at least enforce some minimum standards for minimal costs.
And what is Apple and other manufacturers going to say to Foxconn?
Well, they have to enforce that.
Well, they may say that, but first, what are they trying to do for their products? You want to reduce the price, right? We want to make it cheaper. I don't want to sit here and go ahead and I'm Apple and I'm selling the iPhone 5, and I now see Google going ahead and releasing its phone where the price without contract is $349, right? That's almost got me walking out the door to go ahead and buy that sucker, right? $349 without contract, okay? That's going to put pressure, then come back, and that company's going to put pressure on Foxconn. Foxconn's going to put pressure on trying to go ahead and come up with ways to go ahead and make things more economical, right? Now, can you do that by cutting corners? You could. It might affect quality, right? Or maybe it doesn't affect quality. You just put your people at higher risk, right, and things like that. But people, if they're not in the equation, they're just simply a, collateral cost, okay, in terms of doing things like that. Okay. This is sort of the trade-offs that you're going to have to make when you start talking about doing the global kind of expansions and managing the global kind of workforce. Which for which? Now, one of the things that I think we should do is, we've talked before about the notion of orthodoxies. Did I talk about that? Talking about sort of the dominant kind of frame of reference or lens that a company may use, right? That we are a transportation company. That would be an orthodoxy, okay? Or we always do it in this way, okay? That's an orthodoxy, okay? The problem with companies trying to innovate is to break the orthodoxy, right? How do I break out of the way I've always been accustomed to seeing things? And we told you that, hey, part of the advantages of doing things like an expatriate kind of tour of duty is because breaks your lens that's from your particular country, right? Opens you up, builds your cultural agility, all of those kind of things, okay? But, that's easier to say than to do, right? But one of the orthodoxies maybe we need to break is that somehow paying your people more, giving them more meaningful work, is going to cost us money. Now, you're probably already saying, of course it does, right? So why don't you give me some examples then? Flip that around and give me examples of what you think are companies that spend more, but they make more, okay? And they compete against people who are spending less. Now, the fact that you can't think of examples is a reflection of how strong the orthodoxy is in terms of the way that you do things, okay? So my point to you would be that there are some companies, okay? So we're going to go to retail business. Okay? Walmart, okay? What kind of rep does Walmart get for sort of the amount it pays its people and things like that? Yeah, their people have to go on government aid in order to go ahead and do things, right? Because the amount that they're being paid is relatively or pretty low, okay? So if you're a company, how does that work for you when you define yourself as saying, I'm going to pay my people so little that they're going to be eligible for poverty assistance, which is, of course, coming out of your and my pockets, right, in terms of that kind of...
I don't think that's the business model for supermarkets. There's salary or compensation guidelines that align, whether it's Walmart or Kmart or whatever, right? And then those stores, regardless of how many stores they have or how much money they make, are going to say, well, because we make this much money, I'm going to go and start paying people that are handing out baskets of $100,000 a year, but they don't have to qualify for certain stuff. So I don't.
And that's the likely argument from the dominant position, saying that there's no way you can do this. This is just wasting money. Where's your return on that investment? The which? Southwest Airlines.
They pay their employees above market levels, investing in their employees and doing everything they can in a low-cost airline, which is a cost-efficient strategy. And they're doing phenomenally well. Profitability is higher than all the other airlines.
Well, I just that's different.
Why is it different?
Because it's an airline industry, and the price level is
Okay, so let's go back to retail, grocery industry kind of things, type of things. Let's go back there, yeah.
Would that be almost creating an inflated labor pool where you're paying a Walmart employee what's top dollar, $20 an hour for a skill set that doesn't really you're overcompensating them for skills that they don't really possess. They don't have that skill set.
How do you know they don't possess that skills?
Well, that was my next point. So as you hire them, obviously they have the potential to move up. They typically become managers. You see some of the managers, some of the spouses, different guys or whatever, they become managers and regional managers, move up in the company. But if you've been at Walmart for 10 years, again, probably a high school diploma, probably just local town guy or girl, and you're just trying to get a job. And what is your worth, I guess?
Well, let me translate this a little bit because I believe that's an interesting question about sort of what are they capable of doing in a sense, right? Because that's why we pay them less. But that's the orthodoxy, right? I'm hiring for this low-level position. I'm going to pay relatively little. I'm going to assume that they're not capable of doing more, right? Oh, well, let me finish the argument, right? This is the argument when we talk about sort of having the people like Ed Milliken going ahead and saying that, you know what, rather than making an assumption that they can't do this, instead let's train them in sort of Six Sigma kind of techniques, train them in terms of doing root cause analysis, and then let them practice those skills and let them, through experience, through failure, right, go ahead and determine who's got it and who doesn't got it. Rather than me saying that, hey, I don't think these guys are going to go, they don't got the right stuff to be managers, maybe 1 in 1,000, right? I would say flip that assumption around and just ask yourself, what if everybody has the capability to go ahead and do that? What would you do differently? I can see the sort of looks of disbelief, but hey, do you want to get into it? Maybe you got to do something different. Yes?
Yeah, so I was going to say, it goes back to being creative in your job setting or your role setting as a company. And I feel like Walmart or the retail industry has an opportunity that if they decide we want to break this orthodox paradigm that you're talking about, you can redesign jobs that encompass, greater level of skill, and there's an opportunity to gain efficiency even in that, right? So
Yeah.
instead of just having someone as a cashier, you think, oh, I can pay a cashier this, but what else can that person do? Are there other functions within that shift that, someone can take on, and you're still gaining efficiency
Yeah.
where you're not paying the minimum wage, but, you're still cost cutting. So
Typically-
there's a way that HRM can apply to, these
Right.
cost differentiated strategies.
But you can break jobs down, okay? But then they become molecular. Then it becomes something that it doesn't matter who the hell's talent, they can do the job because it's so mini. But of course, as we know, when you apply some of those job redesign kind of principles, what happens when we go ahead and make those jobs repetitive? No meaning to them. Why should we expect people to be happy or anything like that? They will not be, okay? And the same thing holds not just for the people here, but for your global workforce. Those people in China working those repetitive jobs, which have been designed down to be simplistic because their version of a factory is assemble the pieces and snap the parts in. Not sort of a holistic kind of piece, right? So you're right about job design, but the culture and the management type of things that are all holding that in place, that's a hell of a lot more difficult to change.
Well, one of the things that I think is like most about Home Depot is that within the store environment, even as well as on SSC, we have opportunities for associates working in the stores to, during work hours, for percentage of their shifts, they can allocate towards not just advancement within whatever department they're working in, but also in other areas of the company, like if they want to get into merchandising or both in store, we also allow them to, if they develop a certain degree of expertise, they can come to the store support center and then participate in like blogging efforts and other ways to kind of expand.
And this is something that we would argue that why can't companies do that when they go overseas and things like that, create opportunities like that and things, right? So let me go ahead and drop back to the grocery store kind of things, okay? Ends up, if you look at how much Walmart pays things, very low. Take a look at what Costco pays their people. Much higher, much more of a livable wage, okay? And with that increased kind of pay scale, your argument should be, why? I mean, they're just selling goods. Why are you paying them more than you pay a Walmart? Can't you get by with just paying a Walmart level salary?
That's how they position.
What are they positioning themselves as?
I was going to say that I mean, because when you think about retail, right, the thing at Walmart is that they are basically lower cost. That's what they sell. That's how they're positioned. I'm not saying you can make a living off of retail, but I don't think anybody there's a lot of people that work in retail where they do that and they have a decent living, right? So I think it's just the fact that obviously they're positioning themselves as a lower cost and they're trying to squeeze every single dime that they have, right?
But doesn't Costco sell things pretty cheaply?
Yes.
You can save money through HRM, like Cisco, the example, where they were talking about through retention and training and various things. And those people are not highly skilled. Delivering food to places is not a highly super skilled thing. And they were saving, 10 cents a share, essentially, in cost by doing these things to retain people and train them and raise them up. So you can justify reduced cost other ways, by doing some of this HRM.
And that's the part that when we start saying, how do you go ahead and try to develop things? How can you take this perspective? The thing that you want to do is not be stopped by the idea that, hey, why are we going to pay people more for doing this type of work? I don't see any justification for that. And in Costco's case, where it comes out is Costco's customer service. Okay, longevity of the employees that are there. You get a consistency level of service. You get it with a smile. They go over, bend over backwards for you to do things like that. You get repeat customers coming back over and over again. And customers who, obviously the model's a little different, are more than willing to go ahead and ante up the cost of the membership card. Right? Yeah. So that's a big difference. Dustin, what do you want to say?
I was going to say, it's a different audience. It is a membership. You have to pay a fee up front. And also, the average sale in there on a per visit basis is going to be way higher than Walmart, so people who shell out larger amounts of money at a certain time, even if they're saving costs for their life. And the customer service impact is huge. And the kind of the employees there, we talk about this idea of mirroring with your employee base. go into a Costco and the experience there, versus a Walmart and the customer service and the people you interact with and how they interact with you is completely different.
Well, do you like your customer experience when you shop at Walmart? Then why do you shop at Walmart? You say price, okay? But if there are cheaper prices or other low prices, they're not as successful as Costco. And in fact, Costco is successful because the model works for them. And did I post an article about Costco to the? Yeah. You can take a look at that and see, because I think when you look at that, you see a bit of argument about that. And it breaks the orthodoxy, right, about saying pay the lowest.
They're very strategic with how they expand. They're not looking to be all over the world. They're very strategic. They take their time, and they're very selective on location.
Right. But the bottom line is that it's another different type of model that you can use for doing that. I worry when we get caught up in using existing models and continue to go ahead and extrapolate it. If we're running into a lot of negative consequences, I would say to you, why don't you think about using a different model, right? Try it out. You can pilot it and things like that. We know there's enough instances where things are successfully done, right, where you don't have to run to the bottom on things. Because running to the bottom leads to this kind of crap, right? Because you're forced. And then you get people that are feeling the pressure to go ahead and turn around the margins, so they're going to compromise their people, cut back on safety and health kind of things as they force them to go ahead and work long hours. Like, do you want somebody working on you if they're a doctor who's been pulling like a 14-hour shift and you're an hour 15 on the table? Okay. If he's my doctor, maybe it's different, right? Okay. But that's where we know that it's just like you guys thinking that you do multitasking well. The data doesn't support it. Okay? And the same thing's true when we start talking about sort of some of the things that we hold as orthodoxies. The data may not support it. We may think it does, but this is where we start going to that idea of, hey, hard facts and evidence. Take an evidence-based kind of approach and see what can happen. Okay? So if we apply what we know about some of the things like job satisfaction, motivation, organizational justice, first things I would say is, if you got a bunch of pissed off people all the time there, saying what kind of outcomes can you expect? Retention issues, right? We know exit is a function of the dissatisfaction, right? We know that there are loyalty issues if you got lucky enough that they're going to be active and sort of looking at the best kind of things. But most of the times people aren't going to say a word, right? They're going to suffer in silence until they exit the organization, probably, especially when the organization is authoritarian. Okay? And now why doesn't China have more examples of organizations that are not authoritarian? Well, look at the government. Right? There are no models that are like that. Yeah.
Say one thing, if you can't speak out, it's sabotage the equipment, right?
Yeah.
You see that in plants that if they're afraid to speak out, they manage to figure out how to kill the equipment, and then it's the equipment dying.
And geez, exactly. Yeah, it was like the operators when they used to go ahead and say, hey, let's go ahead and use the metric of going ahead and saying how fast do you answer a call. And then as soon as you answer a call and you solve it, you immediately got a phone thing. The operators learned how to busy out their phone so that it couldn't switch a call to them. Okay? That's a way of employees controlling their level of work kind of things. Why are they doing that? Because they're not feeling fairly treated. Okay? Yeah.
So just to go back to Costco seems to be like a business that's set up in a way to compete, based on service. Whereas these other businesses, they're kind of already in defined markets where the competition says they have to have low cost. Are there any examples of companies that have been able to break out of that orthodoxy and change midstream? Because I just don't see how if you're already in one of these commodity-based markets, I don't see how you shift.
Well, look like car manufacturers. There's a point at which when the Japanese came over with their cars, we called them crap. And in fact, they were pretty much crappy cars. They succeeded in going ahead and producing higher level cars, quality cars, right? Still a little small and a little kludgy kind of things. Then they got even better at doing design, right? But when they go to say, can we move upscale to something else? they created a different kind of brand, right? Yeah. But you ask, how do you transform, right? So part of the transformation is maybe I'm going to go up market on things like that. Now what you're asking is, can you transform and stay in your low market? And I would say if you're going to compete just on sort of price, you're going to be unhappy because competing on price is really a commodity kind of approach where it's going to run to the people who can get to the bottom fastest, right? You want to think about your competitive advantage as being something more than just price, okay? And out there, our concern is really about the workforce producing those products, right? Apple's obviously producing products that have a lot of cachet, right? But they want to do it so they can lower the price, right, to them probably, because it doesn't look like they lower the price to us, okay? But helps them to make money, right? But our side, on the global workforce management is saying that, okay, some of the things that you guys learned in OB should be part of your diagnostics in terms of thinking about what's likely to happen, okay? If we know people are dissatisfied, we know what some of the responses are. What happens when people are satisfied? Productivity goes up, right? We know that. We see some relationship to sort of like decreases in things like absenteeism, turnover, right? There seem to be good reasons to say we should look towards ways in which we can make people more satisfied. We should avoid the dissatisfaction-generating kind of things. And that's easy to say. The next part is, well, what kind of things can you go ahead and do? Well, that may depend on the particular situations, right? But we can also look at things like this idea that we encountered, money is a motivator, right? If it's repetitive work and things like that, and I make money and more money, that might be worth it, right? On the other hand, you can point to those people working in the factories in China. Yeah, they make more money when they produce more types of things, but how much money total are they making? Not much, right? So what we know is if you want to make people happier or more motivated, you take money off the table, right? You pay them enough so that they feel that money is not something that's really making me dissatisfied. Now I can play with other things. Those people in China that wanted to go ahead and move themselves up, create their own businesses, that they were using the money to go ahead and try to build up a fund to be able to do that kind of stuff, those people are not looking for more money just simply as a motivator. They're looking for that next job that will give them that autonomy, mastery, sense of purpose, right? And if your jobs are dissected down to the point at which they're simplistic, yes, you've got reliability, you've got an ease of going ahead and replacing people because they're not really people, they're just going ahead and no more than a machine, right? But you shouldn't expect them to go ahead and generate anything else except dissatisfaction, right? You want people to come up with new ways of doing things? It's the people who work the jobs down at that level that probably have the best ideas about going ahead and redesigning the work or how the flow might be different. But if we take an approach like China does, we're never getting there, okay? Because not enough time, not enough sentiment about that. And as we talk about things like justice, do they feel that there's distributive justice, meaning the way that resources are allocated is fair? How much are they making? Less than $300 per month. Foxconn profits last year? $3.2 billion. Okay? Somebody's making money. Okay? All you got to do when you visit China, when you visit Shanghai and Beijing, is go look at the luxury shops that are there. Watch the people in the big condos or the big apartments and things like that, or the big homes. Somebody's making money, there's no question, and it's coming off the backs of the workforce. Okay? Now, I don't want to sound like I'm trying to be sort of a bleeding heart liberal here. Okay? I'm just saying that, from a point of running a good company, a productive company, I don't want to be a prisoner of sort of these kind of financial assumptions, the way that we should run things. You should be thinking, right, about how you could do things differently and then generate better productive outcomes with a workforce that may be happier, right? I mean, hell, that's a hell of a lot more fun to manage, isn't it? when you got people that are glad to come to work, that are excited, that look at each day as an opportunity to do something cool, okay? But not the other way around. Yeah, Kim. Yeah. Yeah.
So why isn't that happening in the technology industry?
I think you'll see more of that. I mean, as you embarrass more and more major companies like Microsoft, as being, there's some YouTube kind of things that are out there where it's an appeal to Bill Gates saying, Steve Jobs didn't do it. Why don't you step up and go ahead and do it to stop some things going on there? But, that's part of it, right? That, third parties, things like that. But this is the interesting thing, right? How do I get people who have shared interests? How do I build those so that we can move it forward, right? You learned about that when you're doing negotiations and things like that. It's a powerful model when you can identify interests and you can then get everybody in the same direction, right? Then you can accomplish things that otherwise would have looked impossible, right? One more comment about interactional justice. Was there interactional justice at the factory in China that we saw Foxconn? They talked about abusive management, right? That's exactly, when we look at those things, no distributive justice, no interactional justice. Was there procedural justice and what was fair in terms of the way people do things or how you allocated shifts or things? No. 0 for 3, okay? These should be early warning, or not even early warning signs. They just stare you right in the face. You just simply have to take that, react to that, right, to go ahead and alter things. Otherwise, we're going to continue to repeat the same formula. And I've already talked about that, about sort of breaking the orthodoxies so that you can go ahead and develop different kind of approaches. And part of breaking your orthodoxies is this idea of cultural agility. Think Samsung, right? When you want people to think differently, you spend money and you train them, right? 6 months where they just sit around and experience the culture, learn the language, go to the parties, meet your neighbors, join the neighborhood groups. I mean, you want a deeper kind of understanding of the culture and the norms and things like that? That sounds like a pretty good way of doing it, right? And then the second 6 months, you go ahead and work on a project related to Samsung interests. But now, based on the fact that you've got a much better idea of sort of what the different kind of constraints, norms, and things like that are working there, right? If you want to be serious about something, you want to get out of the folly of expecting X when you're rewarding Y. You want X, you reward X. Do you want X, you spend for X, okay? Don't let yourselves get distracted on some of those things. You want to be clear about sort of what it is, what level of kind of capability are we trying to develop. And then friggin' just line it up, right? It's not rocket science, right? But it breaks habits, and that's hard to do, okay? Yeah?
I wonder whether it's easier said than done.
Always.
When you have, if you are Walmart and you have 1.2 million employees around the world, and I don't know how many countries, and these people are usually at just starting level. They don't expect to be there for very long, and they just need something to do for a while. They may not be as motivated to learn and so on. How do you implement the kind of strategy that you are trying to implement, or you're suggesting, which would be different from if you're running a small company where you expect people to be there for a long time and transfer the so-called tacit knowledge to newer employees and so on. Different scenarios.
Well, let me post up a case about Best Buy. Did we talk about Best Buy? Best Buy, did I show you what they did? Okay. They transformed themselves. They have store within a store now, right? Okay, they transformed themselves, made a significant transformation in the way that they've operated, right? Every journey that's difficult begins with a single step, right? You just want to use steps that make sense. right? And we can get there, okay? But it's really, unless we know the specifics about something, I can't give you more than that, but I'll give you examples. All right, let me, I'm sorry, but let me go ahead and just simply close out a few pieces here, because waiting in the wings, we have our next guests here, okay? I'm not going to go through these things, but I want you to note that all of those things are practices, meaning that when you're looking for something that you could do, there's some evidence based on those different practices, right? So you shouldn't be saying, well, I don't know what to do on this. Hell, you got the list. Just go ahead and determine which ones seem to make sense that you might be able to put into play, right? For example, in health and safety, it's a great one to go ahead and line up people's interests, because they are both employees as well as management is usually interested in safety, right? You can start with small pilot projects and get success and then build it up where you start building up trust. You can move on to bigger things, right? But for all of the things that they talked about practices, I'll just simply say you can take a look at it, right, and go ahead and refer back to it. The other thing I want to do is give you a few quotes here. Right, in terms of closing time of things. What's measured improves. If you're serious about something and you've got no metrics, you're not serious about it. Okay? By the same token, if you measure something and that's the only thing you're measuring, that's the only thing people are going to pay attention to. Right? And again, follow expecting X when you're rewarding Y. Okay? You remember we had Buckingham's article about what makes a great manager? Okay? In the minds of great managers, consistent poor performance is not primarily a matter of weakness, stupidity, or disrespect. It is a matter of miscasting. This is an example of saying, take the normal frame you would apply, say they screwed up, and flip it around and say, maybe they didn't screw up, maybe I screwed up by putting them in the wrong positions. Right? Maybe I need to go ahead and put those HCNs in better positions, okay, or the TCNs. Management is nothing more than motivating people. Lee Iacocca. Okay. I'm not sure how true that is, but it certainly is a large part of things. And what you want to be considering is how do you motivate your global workforce in addition to your workforce at home? Right? And understanding sort of differences is good. Here's John Mackey, who's CEO of Whole Foods. He says, we're a business dedicated to meeting all the various stakeholders of the company's best interests. And by stakeholders, we mean customers, team members, stockholders, community, and the environment. Right? Not just stockholders, okay? And they've reinvented some of the way that they do business. Their business model is markedly different than a Kroger or a Publix, right, where you're making very small margins on what you're selling, okay? And the way they're structured is much different, right? And that's a model that you can say maybe that'll work somewhere else globally. I will let you guys go ahead and just talk about that over lunch and things like that after, Chris goes ahead and is able to talk about things. Let me just simply say that both Chuck and I are delighted for your participation in class. You guys were attentive. You were sort of on the ball. We enjoyed that. We're enjoying reading your sort of business plans and sort of what your hotel presentations are looking like. So we just both want to offer our congratulations, and especially on your upcoming graduation. Well, thank you. So, Chris is here to share some entertaining information.
Well, and also another survey.
Yes. First survey, then information.
Yeah. All of you that filled out the first survey should have received an email. Do I need it? Should have received an email from Gamza, my PhD student, who will be coming back in a second. And that email should have given you a number. So if anyone did not receive their number and you had filled out the questionnaire, we can, if something happened to the email, we can give you your number so you'll know. There are 2 people in the class that filled out the first survey who didn't put their name on it. So we weren't able to figure out. There are actually more than 2 people who didn't put their name on it, but the others we could figure out because they didn't rate themselves also, so we were kind of able to figure it out. But some of the people we weren't. So if you're one of those 2 people, you don't have to tell me now, but we brought the surveys, and you can look at them and recognize your handwriting, because I don't remember your handwriting. I don't even know. I think everything I saw from you was typed anyway. So then we can go back and we can enter you. So you won't know your number today because you're not on the maps, but we can do it again and send new maps that will include those 2 people. Okay, so what you'll see today is the maps without those 2. Hopefully we'll be able to identify them, and then that will even be a more complete network map. So the first thing I wanted to ask is if you'd be kind enough to, again, fill out a survey. It's not a network survey, but it's about yourself and also your team and how you interacted and all that. Once that's done, everyone's finished that, then we'll put up the network maps and we'll talk through it and tell you about what they all mean and answer any questions you have. Sound okay? Okay, great. Sure, yeah. So what we're handing out is similar to last time. There's one, there's a consent form that says that we're not forcing you to do this, and there's also a, we're not, and then there's survey
You don't have
Between me and Renee, we need
Yeah, one second.
One more second. I didn't get
I asked everybody to stay.
Did you keep this?
Yes. I didn't get
Really? We have to
we're asking about your current team this semester. We don't need another team, but for this semester.
Really, we have to describe ourselves whether or not we're sexy. I mean, really?
Really? It's an established scale.
Show us
Oh,
I said Fred.
you don't have a consent.
Fill that box
Oh. Okay, then we'll have to fix that one. If you could put your name on the front, that would be appreciated. And I think I'll give it back to here. Oh, there's name on this side. Oh, the consent form. Yeah, just sign it.
On the front? Front and
Front,
side?
back, anywhere you want. As long as we have the signature, we're good. And he was fine.
Somebody should make money out of that kind of stuff. You need something to drink?
No, I've got something. Thank you. Do you want anything?
Or is that next game I know that erase the I and I just wrote everyone.
Yes. Yes, please. Man.
Yeah.
If you'd like to talk about the network, everybody's finished filling it out. That way I figure you get to lunch potentially sooner. Yeah, always good, right? Okay, so these are the results. Happy birthday. So if you weren't here the first time and you decide you want to participate and be on the map, since we have 3 people that we're adding to the map, so you'll get the map after this, but then you'll get a new map that's revised, adding the people. So if you're in the room and you haven't participated and you decide I'd like to be up there, let us know. We have some new old surveys from the first time. Then we can just make it more complete. So, okay, this is the friendship network of your class. It's dense. Which is great. It says that you have a very close class. Girls and boys. So, well, I think, yeah, that's right. There's an extra. No? No. We counted it with the names. We'll go over again, but... Okay. Yeah. Well, when we print this out, if you object to the pink, it actually turns out red when you actually print it on the color printer. So, you know. Okay, so this is very dense. Now, let me tell you about the friendship network. This is on a 5-point scale. So what we were trying to do here is to show you what are the strong relationships. So for some of the classes we've done previously, the class hasn't been as connected as your class. So it's varied by every year. And so this is a lot to look at. So what we did for your class is we did another friendship network map that is only if you responded 3, 4, or 5 on a scale of 1 to 5. Okay, so it takes out the ones that are at the 2 level. This is a little bit easier to look at and figure out who's connected to who and where you are. And for things for you to think about, the numbers on the side are people that were below 3, or it's greater than 3. Greater than 3. Okay, so the people that were 3, 2, or 1 are on the sides. They're not in this, but if we had done everybody in the class, they would have been. You have the differences in the colors. What you want to look at is where are you? Let's say you're on the map. Where are you on the map? Are you central? Are you very, so 444, for example. is very central to the map.
Good job.
You know, now, I mean, look at 446 also. I mean, not that 425 and 447 are slackers either. They're all very central. Now, it's not necessarily always good to be central, so there's pros and cons of both. Now, 446 is just above 444. Just go. But now, if you look at some of the periphery ones, they're connected to people, but not as central to the whole class network. That's okay too. That's just a different position. So some people are more central. Yes, 427 is covering up another one. We should move the number. Do you see 427 right here is covering up someone's number? So we'll have to rotate that. And actually, you're right. 436 is also. We'll check through before we send it to you, so you can see where you are. So let me tell you a little bit about the pros and cons of being central versus peripheral. Okay? If you're central, you get a lot of access to information. You're connected to a lot of people. You can get information very quickly. That's good, but a lot of times the information you get is redundant because we tend to associate with similar people. Who we're connected to tends to be connected to the same people. So we get a lot of information, but a lot of the information might be information we already know or have heard from other people. Okay? So it's quick access to information if you need it, and you also potentially have more influence on other people. The more people you associate with, the more people you have these are strong connections with. Because you're all connected in class. It's just talking about the stronger ones. Now on the periphery, on the pros, you access information, but the information you tend to get tends to be more diverse information or less redundant information. Because you're connected to people that aren't necessarily connected to the same people. So you're connected to different pockets of people. And because of that, you'll get different types of information. So on Central, a con about Central, I mean, it sounds good getting a lot of information, maybe not all redundant, or not all redundant, but a lot. But you have to maintain all those relationships. Now, if you want to maintain all those relationships, that's great. But if you don't have the time or motivation, you might find it draining to try to keep Central. So it depends a lot on your personality. If you're more extroverted and all that, it's probably easier. And it also can be distracting because since you're associating with a lot of people, you're getting a lot of information, and you might not want all that information all the time. So, being connected to a lot of people is great, but it comes with a cost because you have to keep those connections up and reciprocate with them and so forth. If you're on the periphery, you tend to have less power and influence in the group. And these are in general. I'm not saying everybody that's on the periphery doesn't have very little influence or anything, but in general, that's what the positions say. Okay? Let me show you another map. Actually, okay, this is the advice and help network. And this is a 7-point scale. So it was also strong ones. We did greater than 4, so 5, 6, and 7. So, who do you go to for advice or seek help from?
You're welcome.
Oh, greater than 4? Is that what you said? Those are people that are not on this map because their relationships are lower than 4. So if we had cut it at 3 or something, they might have been on the map. But then it would have been a much more dense map. So we looked at your class and tried to cut it where it made sense, where you could actually look at this and go, oh, okay, I understand this. Let's see that. What?
Why are the arrows bi-directional?
That's... Right. No, it's an excellent question. What we did was we could have done it either bidirectional or one-directional. And we just, for this presentation, we did it with bidirectional or reciprocated ties. So it's where you both agree that you have strong connections. Okay, but you could do this for where just if one person says they're strongly connected to someone else, it doesn't have to be reciprocated. It's just different ways of computing maps.
I was impressed after the first survey. I wasn't connected to anybody.
Okay. Yeah, so remember, it's reciprocated. It's also above the number. And so if we were doing this in an organization, we probably wouldn't have as densely connected, but you're spending weekends together. You're spending a lot of time together. And so, of course, everybody's connected, and so that's why we're connecting it. We're cutting it at a higher point. So this is the advice and help. This is the where you are in terms of stimulating people's thinking and sparking new ideas. Interacting with, listening to their comments. And what you're going to see when we send this to you through your email, you're going to be able to, it's a lot to absorb right now, but you're going to be able to, if you want, to print them out and look at them across the maps. And see how you might be very central, let's say, to the friendship network, but you might be not as central to the advice network. Or you might be connected to different people for different things. You also have all your teammates, and you'll see potentially where you might be more connected for things like this with your teammates that you've worked on things than you are with the people you socialize with. Okay? So you're going to print these maps out and go out and have a beer? Yeah. And talk about 2, 3, whatever. Okay, let me show you the next one. If you want to be innovative, who do you choose to go to? So we're seeing some of the same people are staying fairly central for all of them, but others are not as much. And the connections, each of the maps have different, shapes, and they have different, denseness, and they're more close together versus further apart. I was just going to show you this as an example. We have 2 people that are from the Gemba 6 class, that started with the Gemba 6 class. And so I thought you might find this interesting. This is the friendship network for the Gemba 6 class. You see? Yeah. So that's, that really shows you. Now, that's the greater than 3. Yeah. No, it's this one. Yeah.
How many hated each other?
Actually, we didn't bring the map of the class that really didn't look good. There was one that was worse. So, but no, it's not that they didn't like each other. They just, they might have had more connections outside. They might have had more family. A lot of it is some people, they want to be friends with people, but they also have a lot of obligations outside. And so they might not be as, again, we're talking strong connections. They could like everybody. Weak connections is fine. You like people, you interact with them, you get along, but you have your own network outside that you're working with and dealing with. And I know a lot of people, I'm trying to remember Gemba 6, I think there were a lot of people that had kids and a lot of different, not that, I'm not saying people in this class don't, but I think sometimes that has an effect. This class doesn't?
This class has more babies than kids.
Oh, okay. Okay.
There was a lot of single couples. There was a lot of
single,
like they young couples.
Okay. Okay. Well, right. Yes. Yeah, Brandon was asking, we did all the surveys at the exact same time. So we always came in between, in around September doing the network survey in this class, and then we always came back to do the second survey end of October, early November. So it was always in this last semester, and always in this class and all that. So that way, when you respond about your teams, you're always responding about your teams this semester. So we tried to keep it as consistent as possible. So, I didn't bring the other maps, but every class that we've done, this is the 4th time that we've done, they all look a little bit differently. And so it's kind of interesting and how they connect and all that. So that's how it is. And so if you see where you are, you might want to think about, are you happy where you are? Would you like to be more peripheral? Would you rather be, more on the, in the central, would you rather work because you can do things to try to, be more involved in certain things? If you feel like you're too connected with too many people, maybe that's why, it's been too many connections. So maybe you need to spend less time. And so those are things you can think about as you move forward. And I know you're all graduating, but hopefully you'll interact still. So, did I cover all the main? So do you have any questions or anything?
You said we were one of the more connected. Was there classes that were more connected?
The first one was about equal. It's hard to say. Looking at the maps, you both have fairly dense connections, but it varied by each of the questions. So I say about equal. There was one that was. It wasn't this class. It wasn't very good. I remember Chuck Parsons was here for the first 3, and I remember he sat here and said, "Look at that map. Did you do that wrong or something?" No? So, Janine.
Do you do any postgraduate work to see how the networks change or stay the same or, I guess, influence the way that we interact with postgraduation?
We haven't, but we're happy to do that if people would be interested. I think after your class, we finally have enough individual data that we can start analyzing it, because we haven't had enough. You have to have enough of an end to be able to do some meaningful comparisons. And so we finally have enough to do the individual, and so everyone's been waiting to see what does it do. Team-wise, I'm not sure if we'll have enough. I'm hoping we'll have enough, but it's going to be kind of dicey in terms of whether we have to wait to analyze some of the team ones. And let me get to that sexy question. Because that was something that I know your class was the first one that really picked out on that. That was I'm not saying anything, but that was part of the creative personality scale, and it's a personality test or a scale that says that certain adjectives are more characteristic of people that tend to be either higher or lower on creativity. And so it's 30 adjectives, and you check them, and if you check the ones that are considered higher for creative people, you get a +1, and if you check the ones that are for less creative people, you get a -1, and then it adds up, and it shows where you are on the propensity to be creative. And sexy is one of those adjectives that through a lot of research has been found to be associated with people that are more creative. Now, people that say they self-identify as sexy. Now, it's not whether everyone else says they're sexy, but whether they kind of goes with they tend to be confident, tend to be very, sure of what they're doing and all that. And so that's just one of the adjectives. That's why it's there, because it might kind of stick out and seem odd.
How much the cultural bias
Influences the creative personality scale?
No, this kind of tests, or because sometimes give adjectives to yourself.
Right.
Can be perceived as cocky or.
No, that's true. There can be cultural differences. Guff's scale has been used. It's a psychologist named Guff, and I know he's Australian, and he developed a lot of this survey in Western culture, in Australia and different Western countries. I don't know if he's tested it in all countries, and I don't know if he's looked as much at Asian countries. So I'd have to look. But yes, when you have different cultures, you could have different things that are seen as more desirable. So there could be some. And that's just one, just because you have the propensity to be creative doesn't mean you are creative. There's still, do you actually follow through and do those behaviors? And so it doesn't mean a definite connect that way. So, any other questions? Yes, Janine? Sure. So do you want the dense one or the less dense? Wait. This one? Okay, sorry.
That is very dense and that feels accurate.
Good, great. That's great. Yeah, and that's, and remember, this one is, again, since these are reciprocated ties, these are where both people said yes on the friendship network, either 3, 4, or 5. So if one person said 2 and one said 3, they wouldn't be on there. So if we had done the unreciprocated, especially for this one, it would have been so dense, in terms of the different connections. And so we didn't want to show you a little black ball, basically, where you couldn't see where you were. Oh. And this is what's really neat about doing the networks is you can't get this without having everybody respond and seeing where everyone exists as a class. And that's why we do a lot of this with companies, too, trying to see where people exist and then doing some career management about what do you want to do to change your position, to develop it, whatever it might be that would be helpful. This slide is wait, this is the first, you mean the last one? Because we have Friendship Network, we have Advice Network, then we have Stimulating Ideas, Stimulating Thinking, and who you go to if you're trying to be more innovative, more creative in your thinking. Yeah, Rishi.
Does your sexiness scale account for cultural bias? You have an Italian in the class.
he asked that question. Yeah. I don't know. I'd have to do some research. But we'll see. And you know what's funny? This scale, the creative personality scale, was done in 1979. And so when all of you, it's done a lot of research for years. And so, it could be, I don't know if anyone's updated it, it could be at this point, back in the 70s, describing yourself as sexy might have a different connotation, whether it's cultural or not, than now, describing yourself as sexy. My guess is it's changed. And so, that's why I say it's not one-to-one, the connection, but it's just interesting to see. So we're happy to answer any questions you have, and it doesn't have to be right now. If you look at these, you start looking at them, and you wonder about it, definitely we'll consider doing further follow-up if you guys are interested in the other classes and seeing what it does in the future. That would be really neat. You want to?
You mentioned that you guys use this for career management using companies. So what does that mean? I guess, is there any correlation between you're doing more networking and then that kind of helps in terms of your career network?
Right. Because if you're more central in the network, depending on the organization, some organizations being more central might be you're more in the know, you're more visible. So when promotions come up and so forth, you might be more likely to be promoted. But again, it takes time, so it could be more what we call an inverted view, where it's good to be central to a certain extent, but not too central, because you've also got to do your job. And if you're always keeping all these connections, you're not dealing with your job. And so it's got to be some indicator. And so if someone says, I don't feel like I'm as connected to the people that are, in power, if you want to say. And so if we did an organization, you could actually do different hierarchical levels and see who's connected. And sometimes you're surprised to see, hey, why is this person at this level so connected to people above them? And it kind of gives you an interesting thing about where people are and who they might have relationships with. And so it can help thinking about your careers. Maybe you need to, sometimes people will be very connected with people that are at their level, but they haven't thought about people at other levels and being connected there. So, it looked like there was one other question, but maybe. Okay, well, I know I'm out of time. Thank you so much. We will be we'll correct it. Thank you. I always have trouble with this.
Today, so I could just knock I think after oh, okay. We have friends? Everyone will be here. I'll have
Okay, then I'm going to send you what I have.
Wonderful.
Okay. So the one that you have, delete it. I'm going to resend this.
Whatever other people.
I sent you a comment.
Go in here. Did you add it in the?
sustainability very in the title. Oh, you removed it? Oh, okay. Anyway, on the culture one, it sounds like this what's the role of culture with it? They're focused on culture. How can they use that to their advantage? We talk about their culture. We say this. Yeah. And maybe if there's just a connection that says, you know, like what we have already, and there's something that just says, because all this is important when you said no USR. But there's a connection that's got to be made. I think that's not there.
Culture in the U.S.?
I want to create a whole new, you know,